just start out, we'll have a few slides here related to the International Building Code and sort of how we get to the Masonry Code. So the 2009 IBC International Building Code was based on the 2008 edition of the Masonry Code. It goes by a variety of names. The MSJC, the Masonry Standards Joint Committee, which develops the code. It's a joint code between TMS, the Masonry Society, ACI, American Concrete Institute, or ACI International, and American Society of Civil Engineers. The 2012 then references the 2011 version of the TMS 402 code, makes some minor changes to it, but primarily just references the 2011 code. There is a little bit of a problem that some of the section numbers did not get updated. Some of the section numbers still refer back to 2008. So here's some minor corrections to the IBC, the correct section numbers in the 2011 Masonry Code. Most of those are pretty obvious or pretty easy to see, but there are a few minor corrections there. So Chapter 21 of the IBC is Masonry. There's also Chapter 17 in the IBC, which is inspection, testing, verification. In 1705.4 is masonry construction that we have. So we have masonry construction in 1705.4. They used to have tables in the IBC that essentially were the tables that were in the MSJC Code. Those have been removed. Those tables 170451 and 170453 were deleted and are now just referenced to the MSJC Code. So that's just a brief background on International Building Code and what happens there. So here's just an outline of what we're going to cover, some of the major changes in the 2011 Code. We'll talk about the code format briefly. Chapter 1, General Requirements. The two major changes are the common requirements. Some of the common requirements have been moved to Chapter 1. We'll look at those. We've also added deep beam provisions. There's some changes that apply to both Chapters 2 and 3. Allowable stress design and strength design, particularly lap splice requirements that we'll look at as the major one there. Probably the biggest changes are in Chapter 2, allowable stress design, where we removed the 1/3 stress increase option and we recalibrated the stresses, and there's some changes in the shear provisions. And then the rest are relatively minor in Chapter 3, Chapter 6, and a new appendix on infills, but we'll look at all that. So as I mentioned, there's a new format. We have the code and commentary side by side, hopefully providing easier use for the designers, for you all that are using it. It did increase the number of pages going to that format, but I think it is very useful. The 2011 is also based on ASCE 710, load combinations, strength load combinations, allowable stress load combinations. And of course, the big change in ASCE 710 was that wind is now a factored load. So that required us to make a few adjustments to the code, primarily when we get to Chapter 6 on veneer, some of the wind triggers, and we'll look at that. And then also, of course, the allowable stress load combinations change, that now you have the 0.6 factor on wind since you are using a factored wind load. Okay, Chapter 1. Chapter 1 of the TMS 402 code, MSJC code, is general requirements, general design requirements. As I mentioned, the biggest substantive change was deep beam requirements were added. We also moved some common requirements to Chapter 1. We'll look at those, and there were a few other small changes that we'll refer to. So just going through some of the changes in Chapter 1. We used to refer to masonry that was in running bond and stacked bond. That could be a little confusing. The code defined stacked bond as less than 1/4 of a unit overlap. Typically, stacked bond is defined where the head joints line up. So now we just have running bond and not laid in running bond are the only two things that are mentioned in the code, just to clarify that.